Hello, fellow chess players. I am Master Fide Vitaly Grishko, and if your pieces are like this, blocked by your pawns or by opponent pawns, this video is for you. And in this video, I'll teach them how to put them on better positions. So leave a like, subscribe down below, and here we go. Okay, so for starters, white pieces here in this example are passive because their bishop and their knight have to defend their own pawn. Such, they can't go anywhere because if they go somewhere, the pawn is going to be eaten. And the knight, furthermore, is passive twice because he can't go there anymore because of this pawn. So, in general, pieces can be restricted, or all the pieces, by enemy's pawns or by our pawns. But the ways of activating them are actually different. They vary piece by piece. As such, I'll show you one game for each piece. Okay, let's start with the knight, because there are only three rules to remember that I'm going to illustrate with this game from Sergei Karakin, Russian war criminal, and Magnus Carlsen, former world champion, the GOAT. So, the first move is, we're going to see in this game, is knight a5. And the first rule is knight on the rim is dim. Don't put it there unless for a good reason. And here, Magnus did it because it's for a good reason. It's to attack the bishop. It's theoretical. And when the knight does his job, he just comes back. The second rule is that knights like being defended by pawns. As such, they're not as easy to attack. So, all of the best squares in this position are these ones. And Karakin puts the knight here. As such, it occupies a very good square. The knight likes being defended by a pawn, so it's good. And to make things even better for him, black can't attack this knight right away with a pawn. As such, this knight is very strong. Magnus does the same thing. He also puts the knight on a strong square defended by a pawn because knights like that. And then he takes the knight. So this knight is so powerful that Magnus is ready to give a bishop, and as such, give a two bishop advantage for the opponent. But actually, everything is calculated. Here, he goes back with the knight, and when Karakin puts the second knight on this square, we could say to ourselves that, okay, the knight is now defended by a pawn, so Karakin has a very good knight. But no, not in fact. Because if a knight is so good, it's going to get attacked, and he's going to be forced to go back. And then we continue our attack. Karakin can't replant the knight here because we are going to attack his king, and this is very weak. We are going to mate the opponent one day, eventually. So Karakin tries playing c3. Our knight goes back, and now the knight is very, very powerful again. It's exactly on the square it would like to be. It's defended by a pawn. So we attack him. Just we attack first the king and then the knight. Okay, and we are ready to take eventually. So white continues its game, and black even sacrifices a pawn in order to open a little bit the position. And here, the key moment. Bishop goes away, and the third rule is that the closer this square defended by a pawn to the opponent, the better for us. So, for example, if our knight is that far away, we are and defended by a pawn, it's really an invaluable commodity. It's the best piece on the board by far. And we will see that it's going to give the black pieces the cherished victory. For example, here, white takes because the plan is simple. White wants to attack the knight as such with the bishop, but he can't do it now because of e4. So white moves with the rook. So logically, we don't want our knight to get exchanged by the bishop, so we will exchange the bishop. Can you find the move? Here, 3, 2, 1. I show it. It's e4. Magnus, what does he do? He just sacrificed the pawn, but it's for a good reason. Because when Karakin takes, he exchanges the only piece that could have exchanged with the knight. And the knight is a monster. He's terrifying. Not only this is a square that is defended by our pawn, not only opponent's pawns and opponent's pieces can't attack it, it's very, very far away. So this knight is just going to decide the game. Queen d4, we can use the fact that our knight is and our pawns on the black squares in order to navigate them flawlessly. And then there is the bishop on white squares, so it can't do anything. And then we're just going to mate our opponent. Our pieces are very active. Here, for example, the rook is very active. I'm going to show what's an active rook a little bit further. And rook a1 and white resigned, all because of this knight, which is powerful. Okay, so hope with the knight is clear. With the bishops, it's a completely different story. Because whether the bishop is good or bad doesn't depend on its placement, except for one case I'm going to show later. It depends on the color of squares where the pawns are blocked, because pawns are what limits the bishop. So those pawns are on black squares. And it's sad, because it limits it. And also white has some pawns on white squares. So this is a bad bishop. This is a bad bishop because it attacks own pawns. It doesn't attack the opponent. And those potentially are good bishops. So what do? We exchange our bad bishops. For example, here we're going to exchange it for a knight that was maybe going to attack us. And if the knight moves, we're going to exchange it for a good bishop. And we exchanged a bad piece, good piece. It's a good exchange for us. So what do you do here with white? Put the video on a pause. 3, 2, 1, and here white played bishop g4. Because white is tempted to attack here. It has all of its pawns, all of its pieces ready to attack here. But first, white wants to get sure that he's not getting mated on the king side. So he'd like to play this, for example, up to defend everything. But it makes our bishop even more stupid. This pawn chain limits it severely. So we are going to put it beyond this pawn chain. As such, if he puts the knight here, for example, we're going to exchange, and then we exchange our bad bishop for opponent's good bishop. And then if he doesn't do anything, for example, he attacks him, our bishop is no longer limited by our pawns. We will be able to just play like this, and now our bishop is beyond the pawn chain. So he attacks the opponent. Here, it's a bad bishop that's blocked by own pawns. Here, it's a bishop that should be bad, but he is now beyond the pawn chain, so he is active. He attacks the opponent. But usually the opponent won't tolerate it. He will just exchange it. And now we have a good bishop that's going to attack, for example, like this, the opponent. And the opponent has a very, very bad passive bishop that's going to attack his own pawns. By the way, remember I said there is a one place where a bishop is just a monster. It's here. For example, in this opening, Catalan defense, white just plays 95, and as such, the bishop on a big diagonal, it's the biggest diagonal, is a monster. As long as it isn't blocked by pawns, put your bishop on a big diagonal. I mean, not in all the cases, but he's quite strong here. As such, white had to give a pawn in order to have this strong bishop. He's going to get it back because the bishop is so great. He's going to attack. And here, the problem is that black just can't develop itself normally. For example, if he goes here, goodbye the pawn. If he goes here, we can just take it, and take it. And now the black gave back a pawn and has some terrible, terrible pawn structure. Now let's talk about rooks. Rooks hate being blocked by own pawns. The only exception is when it's a passed pawn they help supporting. For example, in this game, where my friend Maxim Gorovko played with white against me with black, here there is one rook blocked with own pawns, and the other one too. So what he does? First, he activates one rook, attacking the pawn, so I have to defend. And here, when I defend, the rook now, yes, it's still blocked by own pawn, but it's an exception I have talked about earlier. Now it helps moving the pawn. So it's actually a good rook now. It supports the pawn that can become queen at any moment. And the second rook, he puts it on the semi-open file because the opponent's pawn can move eventually, while we can't move our pawn if it's blocked. So now he exchanges the pawn and the file is open. So he has two great rooks. One supporting the passed pawn, which is great, and the second one on an open file. An open file is where no pawns are present. And what do we do with a rook on an open file? We invade the opponent. It's the seventh rank. If you have two rooks on the seventh, normally you win because it attacks a lot of pawns. And in end games, even in middle game, it can be devastating. So I try just putting it away, but he reinforces it with other pieces. And eventually, there is a very beautiful tactic. If I takes, takes, he will be able to just win my knight. So I would have most probably taken with the bishop. He takes. First, we have to go here, here, and then the position is just equal. But I was devastated by that. I thought that the position wasn't as good any longer, and I played here. And here, because our rook is active, it supports the pawn. Other rook is active too, it's on the seventh rank. There is an outstanding tactic. He sacrifices the rook, and when I take, the pawn now eventually completes its journey. It becomes a queen, and after takes, he has just uh, this queen against my rook, so he is 5 points up, and I have to give up, unfortunately. Now the queen, the most valuable piece, except probably for the king. So, how do we activate it? Just like all the other pieces, it's just blocked by pawns. However, there is one hidden benefit. Okay, so here white is better. It has an active queen, and white and black has a bad bishop. Do you remember it? A bishop that attacks its own pawns. Here it's beyond the pawn chain. It's good. Here it's bad. And well, black understands that if he is just passive, he's going to lose very handily and in a very excruciating pain. So black tries to activate the queen. Bishop c7, bishop c3, attacking the pawn here, and black queen is finally free. Black gives a pawn for it. The activity in chess is so important that you can sometimes give a pawn for it. And even after uh, white is a pawn up, we activated our queen, comparing it to the first position. And so queen is a very good attacking piece. And in this endgame, we can see that white can't get active because the queen will just go here. And whenever the queen moves, for example, instead of this, doing this, attacking our pawn, our queen will just wreak havoc on the opponent. Attacking here, for example, he'll have to defend. And if he does that, we're going to maybe take a pawn, and there is also just a repeating check. So the game is a draw, even though white has a pawn on more. Because the queen, when it's active, is a very, very strong threat for the opponent. So if you're getting mated, exchange the queens. If you're not getting mated, if it's you who mates the opponent, try getting your queen active, please. Finally, the king. Yeah, can be active too. So in the middle game, you have to protect it. So, by the way, white did its job rather well. It's very well protected. There are a lot of pieces. Usually, if you have one piece defending the king and three pawns in a row, it's great. So the pieces activity is not like this. So this king is not active. It's just bad. It's just in a very precarious position. This is not king activation. It's just stupid. So don't remember it as king activity. However, in the end game, the concept of king activity actually becomes very important. Like for example, here he will be a pawn up eventually. He isn't for the moment, but he will because his pieces are so much active. Here, he takes the pawn. But my king is active because finally, what changed? In the middle game, before, we had our king that would get mated. There were a lot of pieces. It would have been in danger out in the wild. But here, our king won't get mated because there is only one rook. So he can help our pawns because actually it has some value in attacking. So g5, a5, and here I continue attacking, and my king supports it. And if you remember, the rook is behind the pawns, pushing them. So e5, g4, and here just a masterclass in activity. If we take here, our king just kind of stays here. He's going to come back maybe or attack here and wreak havoc. So we activate our king even further. Rook, king e4, sacrificing the pawn. What's the idea? That in the endgame, the king's purpose is to support the pawns, kind of like a rook. And here, in order to do it, there are those beautiful passed pawns. If they're two together, it's just great. They're unstoppable. So, what do? I make another pawn into a passed. So the king attacks, so he has to take eventually, and those two pawns are just unstoppable. And the king this king walk, this king activity decided the game eventually. Thank you for watching. Hope you like this video. If it's the case, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, in order to get better at chess, uh, apply all of those concepts in the video. Put your knight on defended squares by pawns and further into opponent's territory. Exchange the bishop, which is blocked by your pawns. Put the rook on an open file and then invade your opponent. The queen use it to mate, and the king activate it in the endgame and win in chess.